is a conversation with Justin Bram, a cryptocurrency and DeFi expert who is known for his content and reviews of various decentralized exchanges, AMMs, liquidity pools, and how to navigate this fast-paced industry. I wanted to talk to Justin because he puts his detailed reviews into perspective. During our conversation, we talked about the implications if the world shifted from a monetary regime that is predominantly inflationary, such as fiat currencies, to being predominantly deflationary, such as Bitcoin and soon Ethereum. What will the implications be on spending, economic activity, and growth? Will people stop spending at a large scale and start hodling, as the crypto community continues to say? Or will the economy as we know it continue unchanged? We also talked about impermanent loss when providing liquidity, a fascinating topic in and of itself, which has put Justin in a recent Twitter debacle with Bancor Protocol, a leading DEX that claims to have effectively removed impermanent loss when using their protocol. Justin gave a bit of color to why he thinks Bancor didn't necessarily remove impermanent loss as they advertised, but merely shifted the impermanent loss to holders of the BNT token. All in all, a fascinating conversation with a great human being. My name is Mark Dencker, and this is my conversation with Justin Bram. A question that I would like to ask, and I think a lot of people would like to ask, is what excites you about DeFi right now?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's of course a pleasure to be on. Um, as far as what excites me about DeFi, I think it's just incredible to see really the work that the developers are doing. I'm not a developer myself, but I get to see all of it. I'm working full time on a DeFi project. But to see that you can just bring all of the stuff that we have in the traditional system and just write code that represents like the obligations that our institutions have is just fascinating to me. So while I think it's still unclear if DeFi will be like a big part of the future or if it will be the future, I think we all hope it will be. But what's very reassuring to me is just that like intuitively it makes sense that our traditional system and everything that we've built could just be managed by code. And so to me, that seems like a more modern approach. I think we have a lot of challenges ahead, but that's part of what's exciting as well. So I think, the future is still uncertain, which is exciting to me. There's a lot of growth here, a lot of money coming in, which makes it a great opportunity to fundraise or to build a project or to just grow. So for me, it's just great to be at the start of a new industry and see what I can do there.
Awesome. You mentioned that it might be the future. Hopefully it will be the future. What do you see as the main roadblocks? I think everybody who gets excited about DeFi we all have our own reasons. But, I think the common ground that we all find is that on balance, this is an improvement of the current system. So what do you see as the roadblocks that could prevent DeFi from getting mass adoption?
Yeah, well, it sounds like you have a lot of questions there. I think, first off, I don't think it's clear right now that it's just straight up better than the traditional system we have in place. I think, like, to highlight that, one of the big risks we have, and what I think is not talked about enough, is just that most of DeFi right now is for speculation, which is fine, and that should, of course, be allowed. But I think so much of the volume goes towards like pump and dump projects or just complete exploits. And so I think those are pretty harmful to the industry just because, we could have the next, like a 16-year-old Vitalik that brings money into DeFi. Somehow he scrapes together $1,000 or she scrapes together $1,000 and they look to invest and they end up, it's a pump and dump project or a scam, and that pushes them out of the system. So I think that's like one big thing we have to monitor for. And then of course, just I guess two other things. So what's one is like making sure exploits and pump and dumps aren't a significant part of DeFi, and it's just kind of like a fringe use case, and we get true use cases coming out of DeFi. But the second thing I think is obviously regulation. That's a top of mind for everybody. So um, yeah, I would say there's certainly regulatory risk, and I think it makes sense. Like if I was a country, I would be concerned about not only that like people are transacting in currencies that aren't your native currency, but also that people can get exploited. There are scams out there, etc. And it just is the Wild West. I mean, DeFi is the Wild West, and people that go
Mm.
on there expect that. But if we want to scale to a global system, that's just I don't think we can keep um, that risk there. So I think regulations are a big risk. And then lastly, I would say it's just onboarding people to the technology. I mean, right now the experience it's pretty tough.
Mm.
I did, when I started out over a year ago, and this is still the case, you get your money into Coinbase or whatever your native service is, whether it's Binance or something else, and you
Mm.
have to figure out what currency to buy. And if you've never been on Ethereum before, or whatever blockchain you're looking at, you might not even know that you have to buy that native currency. So I didn't even know at the time that you have to hold Ethereum to transact on Ethereum. It seems intuitive to us that have used it, but that's one thing. And then you have to download a wallet and store your seed phrase. And I think for most people, when they get their first wallet, they take a screenshot of their seed phrase, if at all. If so they're probably not securing that. And then they have to figure out how to use it, what gas means, how to pay for gas, how much you should pay, what apps are trustworthy, what aren't.
Mm.
One of the confusing things in this space is just because something has like a quirky meme to it, like Sushi Swap, that doesn't
Mm.
mean it's not a legitimate project. So there's just so much to look out for, and that the education isn't there yet. And it's most
Mm.
people just aren't technologically savvy, and that's okay. But we have to deliver products that fit their needs too.
Yeah, the names, just starting with that, it seems to be a big issue, even for someone like me who also follows the space quite closely. But I completely dismissed Polkadot because I thought it was a ridiculous name. I didn't,
Yeah.
I'm like a Polish dance or something. I don't know. So I just completely dismissed it. And then, I mean, a few years later or a few months later, even, it becomes top 10 on CoinMarketCap. I was like, ah, God damn it. But I completely agree in terms of the usability. Just a little anecdote from here in Copenhagen. One of my friends, he's a developer, so super technical guy, started playing around with crypto and blockchain, starting with Ethereum, as most people do, especially if they're technical. I think they like the idea of being able to do stuff with a chain like Ethereum. And then I showed him Aave, and he got interested. He complained about the gas fee as everybody else using Ethereum for now at least. So I showed him Matic, how he can migrate and bridge from Ethereum to Matic and staking and all these things that you can do with Aave. And it took him, I think, less than an hour to get excited, get some Matic token. But then he made the mistake that I think a lot of people have done, depositing all his Matic to Aave, which means that he didn't have any Matic left to do any other transactions, like withdrawing when he wanted to do that. So
Yeah.
even a super technical guy like my friend here, he didn't wrap his head around this concept, and he used both Ethereum and Matic. So when that's the case, just to underline and take it home, your original point, I think there's a long way to go for us in terms of usability in order to receive or obtain mass adoption.
Yeah. So yeah, a few things on that. I mean, it's a common thing we get in our Discord community is like, this platform isn't letting me transact. What's going on here? I deposited my ETH into this pool and I'm looking to withdraw it. Totally a
Mm.
legitimate project, but they just ended up depositing all of their ETH in, which happens all the time. And yeah, it's these little things that I think can just turn people off, because when you're onboarding something to a whole new concept, like one roadblock might be enough to stop you. So it's like, you have to worry about gas. You have to make sure you're sending to the right address, that you're not going to a scam project, that you're like talking to the right people. There's just no good understanding yet of how to go about this. But I think the good news is Consensus is obviously a very talented team. They're behind MetaMask.
Mm.
Um, I think folks are working on it. I mean, I have to believe that, and just from everything I know about the space and everyone I've talked to, is that there's a lot of mobile wallets that are being designed, which I think should. Those are the companies and people that can really target these challenges are the wallets.
Agreed. I came across a wallet the other day called Taurus, and they basically managed to build a wallet where nobody holds their private key. Like Taurus doesn't hold it, not any centralized server. What they do is they split your private key into pieces.
Hmm.
So what caught my attention was it was so easy to log in. I didn't need to store my seed phrase or anything. I could just use email password or social login like Google. And what happens, the way I understand it, is that they split up the private key between your local machine, like your laptop. If I log in with my laptop here, a node, a server, so a network of nodes where they have a piece of the private key, and then finally on the Google server, if you logged in with Google, for example. So basically, split it up in three. They probably split it even more, but that's the idea. And
Mhm.
that was pretty interesting, I thought, because then when you integrate with something like Taurus, I know Aave does it. That's how I came across it. Then it becomes much easier for people, I think, to just get started, to just log in on board. So in my opinion, this is the kind of applications and features, wallets that we need to get mass adoption, or at least the road towards that.
Yeah, no, it's something I've thought about a good bit, and I think the conclusion I've come to is that I'm not sure self custody is for everybody. Like, I
Hmm.
I enjoy that the bank is the bank is FDIC insured and that they're in charge of managing my, like, not managing my assets, but maintaining their security. And if I buy
Hmm.
stocks or U.S. equities, like, I don't have to hold a physical certificate or even a digital certificate. That there's a centralized platform that can pass it on and take care of
Hmm.
it and protect it. And there's some guarantees there and insurance. And I know that's somewhat of a controversial opinion in the DeFi space, but I just don't think self custody is for everyone. I mean, I enjoy it
Hmm.
for crypto purposes. Obviously, my full net worth is in crypto.
Hmm.
Um, but I think for most people, if you're just your average person that just wants to do a few transactions, spend here, like spend at a cafe, perhaps self custody isn't for everyone. And I think that's okay. I think hopefully we can have some type of middle ground solution where there's
Hmm.
a wallet or platform where you have full ownership of your funds, you have the protection to withdraw, and no one can take them from you. But there's
Hmm.
some assurances there, insurance, or just some other protections. So I think right now, this like black and white full custody by the platform and full self custody is probably not going to be the future model. Just it's
Hmm.
hard to imagine that every individual, however competent or incompetent they are, could be in charge of their entire life savings. I mean, it's a
Hmm.
scary idea that if you lose your seed phrase, you could lose all of your money, and I don't think that's a way we can operate in the future.
For sure. I mean, there's a reason why people don't stuff their dollars, if they're old school, into the mattress anymore, despite
Yeah,
all the bank runs and problems in the centralized financial system.
yeah.
We still use it on a big scale. So it's probably a good reason for that. But
Mhm.
speaking of DeFi, you are very much into, yeah, self custody, yield farming, liquidity pools, and you got into a bit of a Twitter storm, it seems, from what I can see at least, in about impermanent loss, which is obviously a big discussion when it comes to liquidity pools and yield farming, etc. So, from what I gather, but please correct me if I'm wrong, you basically argue that people shouldn't be worried about impermanent loss. So maybe you can clarify that. Why are you not worried about impermanent loss?
Yeah, sure. I'm glad you brought it up. I've never really had some type of Twitter kind of like this, so it's fascinating. But right off the bat, like if you want my most coherent and thought out perspective, I have a YouTube video on this. It's on my channel. If you just search for Justin Bram on YouTube, it should come up. But the video probably explains it better than I can live. But a couple caveats before I get into it. The first is I don't really deal with or talk about like pump and dumps or super speculative tokens. So if you're expecting like a token could go up 5x, 10x, or go down 50% or go to 10% of its current value, that's like really a different case. But in my community and on YouTube, I talk about like very legitimate projects and very like, of course, nothing in crypto is stable. It's all very volatile, but relative to crypto on the more stable side.
Mhm.
Um, but if you look at the math, as long as a token's not having a 3x move or 4x move or 5x move relative to your other asset in the pair, meaning they're pretty uncorrelated, which we know in crypto almost everything is highly, highly correlated. But
Mm.
if one of your tokens has such a strong move relative to the other, you will, of course, face impermanent loss. But in my view, this is pretty rare of an occurrence. I just don't expect any token I'm holding to 5x or 10x. I think we all wish that was the case, but it's probably not going to happen. At least when you're holding it, it's it's usually when you sell that happens. But
Yeah.
um, so I simply argue I don't expect this. I'd rather put my funds in an AMM and have some swap fees. And if the token does 5x, yes, I'll have impermanent loss of, say, I'd have to pull up a calculator, but it's probably like 10% or 8% or something like that. But if I have one side of that pair that has such a strong move relative to the other, for me personally, I'm just going to be appreciative that I was holding that asset because it's such an uncommon occurrence. So that's one side of it, is like we're never going to find the best yield. We're always going to be struggling to find the best yield. At best, we can hope to match the market. That's really all the experts can do as well. So I'm okay not having, if I have a little impermanent loss if there's such a strong move. But the
Mm.
other side of it is like I'm just a firm believer in efficient markets, or mostly efficient markets. And
Mm.
so if you look at Uniswap, if impermanent loss was more often than not greater than what you get from swap fees, I just don't believe Uniswap would exist. And you can kind of look at some of the data, and this becomes a little clear that in almost all circumstances, swap fees outpace impermanent loss. And intuitively, this just makes sense because if you're providing liquidity, you would only do that and give up your assets for a temporary period of time as long as you're compensated for it. And if you start losing money on a position, you just would take your funds out. Your funds wouldn't be there, and people would learn over time. So I believe markets are pretty efficient. Obviously, crypto is new, so there's some inefficiencies that happen all the time. But that's the second main thing. And the last thing is whatever pair you're considering providing liquidity for. And again, like I mentioned, I don't talk about like very speculative projects or projects that don't have a good team behind them. So not pump and dumps, but if you're looking at any legitimate pair like an ETH Uni pair, ETH
Mm.
WBTC, ETH stablecoin, those types of pairs, there's
Mm.
almost always another place you can deposit your LP token. And so that gives you even a further reward than just the swap fees. And doing that will almost always, always, always outpace impermanent loss because the APRs on those can be 20, 30, 40, 50%.
Mm.
So that's the last thing, is I think most people don't just hold LP tokens, they actually stake it somewhere and get another yield on it.
Sure. The way I like to look at it, I'm a big fan of ETH and Matic, and I always look for pairs that I would hold. I mean, whether I hold more ETH or more Matic or more BTC for that matter, I'm not so concerned with that. Like I like the projects or the protocols regardless. So it
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't hurt me too much if let's say Matic increases like crazy, which it has done in the past, then I'll just get more ETH, which
Yeah.
is nice. So in a way, when you find pairs that you like, then a liquidity pool in a way works as a trading bot for you. It automatically trades over to an asset that you like, because the other asset has been appreciating relatively. So if you look at it that way, then it's a pretty good deal, I think. When you, in addition to that, get swapping fees and all these different fees that you as a liquidity provider receive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's another thing people, when they think about impermanent loss, I think a lot of people are in super speculative pairs or are just
Mm.
providing liquidity so they can stake it for rewards. And that admittedly is much different, right? Like if you're not comfortable with the underlying assets, for me, that's just a avoid right off the bat. But I guess a lot of people do, like they see a new project launch. Like I think Iron Finance is a great example. They just launched
Yes.
V2 or V3, whatever it is, after their recent failed attempt at an algorithmic stablecoin. But it's like people don't actually want to hold their, I think the new token is called ICE. Like no one wants to hold that, but you kind of have to
Mm.
provide liquidity with that side of the pair. And of course, that token can 10x or can go to 10% of its current value, or 20x, or just go to zero. So there is, of course, impermanent loss there, but that's just personally not something I talk about or I'm interested in because
Yeah.
those projects just aren't, they're not making a lasting impact on the space. They're not going to be here in 5 years. I'm like really trying to focus purely on the innovation.
Exactly. And I mean, it's to me, projects like these, they are just an iteration of the BitConnects and all these different,
Yeah.
if not straight up pyramid schemes, then close to, right? Because when you see, I think Iron Finance, as you say, they launched or relaunched, and they promise now, what is it, 5-6% daily return. No project in the world has been growing at a 5 to 6% rate on a daily basis. So
Yeah.
obviously it's not sustainable, right? So it
Yeah.
will attract some people, quick returns and all that. It will always attract some people, but it won't sustain. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, in all fairness to these projects and the people that invest in them, because I mean, I did when I first got in this space. Like I was just playing around, and it was exciting, and it is fun. I mean, it's like in a way it's gambling, but it feels a little more sophisticated because there is like a little more strategy involved, and you're trying to
Mm,
outcompete the others. So it is fun, and like I think there's completely a place for that. But as we said at the start of the call, it's something I am concerned about, that a lot of DeFi is just pure speculation,
mm,
and a lot of it is these type of projects that aren't really adding value to the space, but they're just fun to play around with, which is okay. But it's my hope that as the space develops, we just grow past that. So
yeah. So
you
speaking of,
when
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, we were talking earlier off the call about Bancor. I'm not sure if that's something you wanted me to touch on, but they were some of the folks that replied to my tweet. And Bancor right now has impermanent loss insurance. So they were telling me, they're showing impermanent loss is serious. You should look out for it. But I did some research on the platform. I wasn't too familiar with it. I understand it's an original DEX, but did some research on it, and they're protecting against impermanent loss with their native Bancor token. So it's a weird situation where you can't really have it both ways, right? Either impermanent loss is something you should be worried about, and in that case, you would never want to hold the Bancor token because you're paying for all of that impermanent loss. And the other side of it is, well, if it's not something we want to worry about, then we can pay for
Mm,
it with the Bancor token, but that kind of defeats their argument that they should insure for it. So I understand they're trying to, get a lot of TVL on their platform and grow and come back to compete with Uniswap and the others.
mm.
But it was really an interesting thing that I just wanted to point out.
Yeah, and just for context for the listener, there was a bit of a debate on Twitter between you and Bancor. The token is BNT, and I think actually they are the original DEX, one of the first out there.
Hmm.
People can fact check that on me, but it was pretty interesting for me to see how they just jumped straight into your Twitter feed and argued why people should be scared almost of impermanent loss, and obviously they provide a solution called self-insurance or something like that in their protocol. But you made a point which I thought was spot on, that if they basically insure people by compensating people that experience impermanent loss with the BNT token. But if that's the case, then all BNT holders would be basically subsidizing the people holding that, all the other people that are providing liquidity, getting fees, and then experiencing perhaps impermanent loss. So it doesn't seem like a great deal to people holding the BNT token in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's interesting. It's they're like shorting impermanent loss by doing this. They're basically betting that impermanent loss actually won't be that significant, and they're
Mm,
willing to pay for it, which is kind of the opposite of the position they are taking publicly, which I completely understand. Again, there's a lot of competition in this space. They need to grow TVL to make the Bancor token worth it. So there's this chicken and the egg problem, and
mm,
they also need to get a lot of action on the Bancor platform as far as liquidity and swaps, so that the fees are worth it. So I get they're in a tricky position,
mm.
but these are the fun conversations I like to have. So
Yeah, it almost seems like a uh, they seem to be in a problem where in one direction they want to secure their users by compensating, but at the other time, on the other hand, they want to compensate. Sorry, they want to have people buy the BNT token because on Bancor all the pairs are connected to BNT, so ETH BNT, WBTC BNT, etc., etc., etc. So they also need people to buy the BNT token. So it's a bit of a controversy that they have put themselves in, if you ask me, by having this self-insurance kind of feature built into the
yeah.
protocol.
Yeah, I wasn't. I didn't know that all sides of their pairs had the Bancor token on the other side. I thought you could have unrelated pairs. One of the counters which I thought they provided, which is completely fair, is that well, you can just provide liquidity and not hold the Bancor token, and in that case, you're not subsidizing impermanent loss. But so that is definitely a use case. Like if you don't want to deal with the Bancor token, and if you can actually provide any pair you'd like. I'm not sure if that's true. We'd have to check.
Hmm. Yeah.
But you don't have to deal with the Bancor token if you don't want, and that's totally legitimate. So
From what I can see, I opened their platform after watching the Twitter storm coming at you, and all I could see were people can correct me if I'm wrong again, but the first 2, 3, 5 pages, I think, that I scrolled through. They
Wow.
all had
Okay.
some asset and then BNC connected to it.
Wow. Okay.
So
Interesting.
yeah, seems like a controversy that they put themselves in, if you ask me. But maybe people will correct me after this. But speaking of
Yeah.
solid projects, mostly you look at projects that is built on Ethereum, from what I can gather. And we all know EIP-1559 is coming up. They are planning to launch a mainnet in August 4th. So in less than a month, people are quite excited about this in the Ethereum community. What do you think will happen? Do you have any thoughts on what will happen after the EIP 1559 is rolled out?
Sure. Yeah. So I can't say I'm confident that the like it will have a drastic impact on the price of ETH. I mean, I never, of course, no one can predict these things. You never know what to expect. I will say the numbers I've seen. So after 1559 passes or goes through the network, if we have on average an 100 gas price, which is much higher than what we have now. In like the peak of a few months ago, it was consistently higher than that. But before the ETH2 merge, after 1559, if gas is 100 and above, we have deflationary ETH. And then after the merge, gas only has to be 1 to be
Mm,
deflationary. So of course, there will be decreased sell pressure from miners with 1559 because um, there's that base fee, which is just always getting burned, and the quote unquote tip goes to miners.
right.
So there is less sell pressure. Obviously, it's impossible to predict if that has an impact on price right now. It probably will in the future, I think.
Mm,
Um, but of course, if we could predict that the price would go up, we'd all just go all in on ETH right now. So
mm,
yeah, I think it's going to be a great, more importantly, I think it's going to be good for the user experience of just, we've all, no matter how much of an expert you are with Ethereum, like sometimes you set your gas to even
mm,
fast gas, and it doesn't get mined in the next block, and the gas spikes, and you're kind of out of luck, and you either have to speed up your transaction through MetaMask, which most users probably don't know how to do that, even though it is fairly simple.
mm,
Um, but so I think it's just a better user experience, and there's now ways in the new system to guarantee your transaction happens at some point in the next 10 blocks, which is about less than 2 minutes or a little less than 2 minutes. So I think it's
nice.
great for the user experience. I think it sets Ethereum up for a good place in the future. But it's unclear to me if it will have a drastic impact before the merge.
Right. Yeah, I mean, these markets, crypto in general, is it's very young. It's not as mature as the stock market or bond market, where sort of expectations are already accounted for in the price. Uh, the future will show if
Yeah.
August 4th is going to be a dramatic increase or decrease, for that matter, in in the ETH price.
Yeah, well, one other thing on that. So yeah, I agree. Most things are, of course, priced in, but I actually had someone on my YouTube channel did a live AMA with them. Squish, he put out like the very long 120 page or so paper, like pricing ETH
Mm,
at a crazy amount. But he put out a very interesting theory that you can't actually price in supply shocks or supply halving. So the best example is Bitcoin. Every 4 years, or 4 or so years, issuance drops by half, and
mm,
this has historically been correlated with a price increase. Obviously, no one knows what will happen in the future, but historically, every time the price of or the issuance of Bitcoin halves, the price goes up. And he said, like, we all know this, but we can't price it in right now because the miners are going to sell regardless. So they have fees that they accrue on, like whether it's hardware fees,
mm,
electric, whatever they're doing. It costs a lot of money to mine. Um, and the reward you get for mining is always just a little bit more than the cost it takes to mine that Bitcoin because there's perfect competition in this market. So if
mm,
Bitcoin costs $30,000, let's just say it costs 25 or 29 or something that's just slightly under that to mine the Bitcoin. So
mm,
Bitcoin miners make a profit, but at the end of the day, they're always selling their Bitcoin. They just have to cover their costs. And so if Bitcoin goes 2x, if Bitcoin issuance halves, they're still selling that Bitcoin even if the price goes up more than that. So it's hard to, when it's a supply shock, it's hard to to price that
price
in
in.
because whatever
Mm,
happens to the price, Bitcoin miners are still selling it.
mm,
And the same is, from my understanding, the same is true with Ethereum. So it's not clear to me we can price that in. Like it's something that just might not be priceable. Like that those sales are just going to stop when the issuance goes down. So it's interesting. We'll see what happens. Um, Another thing I had a little bit of a controversial take on is I don't think the economic theory behind inflation is that it spurs activity, right? So
Mm,
in the US, we target 2% inflation. It's a bit higher than that now. But what's interesting is like most economists agree that 2% or so, something small amount of inflation is healthy because if you know your currency is going to be worth less in the future, it just increases spending pressure. So,
mm,
if I was thinking about buying a car, I'm more likely to buy it with high inflation.
mm,
But what's interesting, like the narrative in cryptocurrency is all inflation is always bad. And
mm,
I don't think that debate is settled yet. So the one counter argument you could have to EIP 1559 and ETH2 is simply that if the price of ETH is always going up, if the supply is always going down, it makes it a lot harder for me to justify spending ETH on a transaction or whatever it is I want to spend it on. And the best counter argument I've heard to that is, well, you're executing a transaction at the time you execute it, and you're going to do it so long as the value you get from that transaction is higher than the ETH that you spend to make it. But, that's kind of, I don't know if that's a perfect answer because there are always transactions on the fringe. Like you might be uncertain about making a transaction, uncertain if you want to buy ETH or sell it.
mm,
But perhaps in the back of everyone's mind and the collective consensus of everyone on Ethereum is that if supply is going down, if price is going up, I'm less likely to spend ETH and make it an active network, which is something we need for DeFi. So that is one counter argument to 1559 in the merge that I do want to point out. I think
mm,
it's not settled yet. As much
mm.
as we're all excited about the supply going down, I'm not sure that's. I mean, it's not just positive that's going to be great for DeFi and building on Ethereum.
Right. I think you touch on a fascinating point that I haven't heard before, at least the whole inflation and deflation argument. As you mentioned, economists call the whole 2% inflation as oil in the economic machinery. People are incentivized to spend, hence the economy grows, et cetera, et cetera. What happens in a situation, an extreme situation, where everything is, everybody transacts in Ethereum that is deflationary eventually, Bitcoin eventually. Like, what happens then? Do we just stop spending, or do we, economic growth is going to crumble?
Yeah,
uh, it's going to be a very, very interesting thing to see in the future. What will happen? People, as more and more people get into crypto, are they getting more and more incentivized to spend less, save more? And how is that going to affect, everyday businesses that today thrive because we are spending perhaps more than might be good for us, but the business is open, which is a good thing. I think we can all agree.
yeah, and it's yeah, absolutely. It's also something we can think of intuitively, like even in your native currencies term. For me, I'm in the U.S., so the U.S. dollar. Like, if I have
Mm,
$1 million in my bank account, and I know that in 10 years that $1 million is going to have much more purchasing power, maybe I don't have to work now. Maybe that is enough to sustain me like for the rest of my life. And that deflation will make the value of whatever I'm holding much more. And so like perhaps then I'm less likely to, I don't want to purchase a house now because I know I can get a better one in 5 years, or I'm not going to purchase a car, or I'm not
true.
going to work or contribute. So there's a lot of economic questions that aren't yet answered in crypto in general, and especially on Ethereum, which I think are all exciting questions. But I don't think a lot of these concepts have really been tested yet in human history. I'm not positive, but I don't think we've ever had like a
Mm,
situation where the native currency is deflationary and there's a ton of economic activity around that, and how that impacts things in the 10-year time frame, 100 years, etc. Because that's what I'm most fascinated in. So it's going to be very interesting what happens with the Ethereum experiment, but it's a fun place to be. So there's always something new
fascinating.
changing.
Fascinating. And you mentioned now Ethereum and Bitcoin. A lot of people, especially with EIP 1559, they talk about the flippening, meaning Ethereum will have a higher market cap than Bitcoin. Do you think Ethereum will flip Bitcoin anytime soon, or what is your perspective on this?
So yeah, I think it will eventually. I don't think it's going to be pretty though. I think everyone like cheering on the flippening while it's like an exciting thing to do, and I'm of course more aligned with Ethereum than Bitcoin. it seems like like intuitively it seems like it would be a messy thing if like tomorrow the market cap of Ethereum outpaced Bitcoin's. Like it would just be a shock to the entire space. Even people that have never bought any cryptocurrency are just
Mm,
going to see that and be very confused. Most people, I think, in this world think Bitcoin is like the gold standard of cryptocurrency. So if that's no longer the gold standard, does that just mean like we can't trust any of these assets? Like,
mm,
can a pump and dump like Doge outpace Ethereum and Bitcoin now if Ethereum just beat Bitcoin? But
mm,
I think in the long run, it's probably a safe bet. I mean, I think Bitcoin will always have a place. It's the first. There's a great community behind it, or a passionate community about it. There's a fixed supply cap, which is exciting to a lot of people,
mm,
and just a lot of adoption. Like we now see countries adopt Bitcoin. So I think Bitcoin will always be there. But I think if Ethereum and DeFi in particular reaches the goals there, which is to become the settlement layer for the world and like an economic base layer for the world, and if DeFi becomes a big thing, I mean, it just makes sense that
mm,
um, the market cap of Ethereum would be higher than Bitcoin's.
mm.
I'd have to check what the market cap is now, but I think we could look up the actual price of the market cap of ETH, but I think Ethereum's market cap is lower than PayPal's right now. But Ethereum settles more transactions than PayPal, much more, and there's so much innovation happening on Ethereum. There's so many really exciting apps and services and products, insurance and NFTs that um, I could make the case that Ethereum's undervalued right now, and I think that could perhaps make it worth more than Bitcoin. So we'll see. I think the market will figure it out eventually.
Time will tell, but it is truly a fascinating time to be in crypto, DeFi, etc. I mean, so many things that you're saying is being built on this. Every day when I open up my Twitter feed, I marvel at some of the announcements that people and projects are doing and announcing. It's like, okay, holy crap, can you do this now? I mean, it's incredible, and I'm sure you have the same experience with all the different content that you post, reviewing different platforms, etc. It must be hard to keep up almost sometimes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think with the Discord community that we have, like part of my YouTube channel, and just like finding the right people on Twitter and having the right people in Discord, I think aware of most of the exciting projects, but yeah, to your point, at this point, I think it's impossible to like really have a good grasp on every project that's launching
Mm.
because it feels like every day or there's at least 5 new projects a week that launch that are like very exciting, which is really exhilarating. But yeah, it's hard to come up or to keep up with everything. So
People, mainly when people get into crypto and DeFi, from what I gather at least, is very much the whole catchphrase around financial freedom, the narrative around financial freedom that all of a sudden you can put your assets to work and work for you instead of against you. You know, if you put it in the bank, your money is slowly but surely going to get worth less, and you keep having to work to get more dollars in the bank because they are decreasing in value. Whereas if you stake your Ethereum or whatever crypto you might be in, or you provide liquidity on a pair of cryptocurrency tokens, then money will start working for you. And a lot of people, the narrative of financial freedom is very attractive, obviously, to many people. But what do you think, combining the whole DeFi space? What do you think about when you think about financial freedom?
yeah, I think for one, self custody, obviously, like this is, as far as I know, one of the first times in history that you could forget about holding Ethereum and Bitcoin. Like, let's just say you want to hold USDC, which is obviously is a reputable stablecoin, or any other asset that you want. Like, you can forget about Ethereum, Bitcoin. You can hold a stablecoin. You can hold any niche currency, and that can be protected by just 12 or 24 word seed phrase that you have memorized in your head, which to me is so fascinating. Like, if you have a passport, you can memorize his 12 words or write them down or store them somewhere safe, and you can go anywhere in the world. And it's just cool that you could have $1 billion protected by just these 12 words, and you can go
Mm.
anywhere in the world and have that freedom. That it's like the idea of a go bag. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term, but like you can
Yeah.
have your passport packed in it, your seed phrase. You don't need
Yeah.
any cash now,
Yeah.
maybe just a laptop or a smartphone to connect to the internet, and you can just go anywhere and you know that you have like some value that you've protected with just intellectual property. I mean, there's no way anyone will know you have those 12 words or what's connected. or that your identity is connected to your addresses, which is very fascinating. So no one can take that away, which is very liberating. So I think that's one big thing. And then I think also like people that are interested in DeFi right now just are more financially aware because you kind of have to be like if you learn how to play around with DeFi, you have to get a basic understanding of some economic principles, which is pretty cool. But
Mm.
again, that probably filters a lot of people out. So
Yeah, it's incredible. I've connect and talked to a lot of people who stake and provide liquidity and are deep into DeFi. It's just incredible to me to see one on one side. It's fascinating how many people are just living off the income that they generate from providing liquidity, but it also saddens me a bit that they are not really motivated anymore to work. It's almost like a startup founder who sold their company and they made a ton of money, and now they're not really as passionate or driven as they used to be because now they have all this cash sitting in the bank. Why should they work anymore? So it's a bit of a controversy for them also when you are early into DeFi, early into crypto. Uh, at least I've seen people become almost lazy. Back to the whole
yeah,
inflation versus deflation argument, right? It demotivates people at least to
yeah.
some extent.
Yeah, well, just a couple things in my own anecdote on that. I feel like I'm perhaps one of the luckiest people as far as timing goes. I never had bought any cryptocurrency, got involved in the space, I think about a year and a half ago. So, right when COVID, the March crash was happening. And that's
Yes.
when I had the opportunity to join a DeFi company full time. So, I was like getting exposed to all of that. And I was just buying these assets that have gone up 10 and 20x since then. So, I feel very lucky and I understand that. And I think like people should have a right, like if they want to tap, like sign out of the global economy and just get a yield on their crypto assets, like good for them. That's
Mm,
cool. But I will say, like, my theory personally is that all of these interest rates that we see that are unnaturally high, and when I say unnaturally high, that's like compared to the risk-free rate in the U.S. or the U.S. Treasury.
mm,
So if the U.S. government's setting interest rates, let's just say at 1%, I'm not sure exactly what it is right now, but
mm,
it doesn't make sense that we could have stable coin yields in DeFi of 10 to 20%. The reason they're that high for very reputable projects is, well, I think there is risk attached to it and there's uncertainty and there's little institutional investment. So my personal theory is that as the market develops in 5 years or maybe even less, depending on how quickly we get adoption, all of these rates we're seeing will come down because it doesn't make sense that if you could get 4% risk free with Coinbase, which is something they're offering, obviously it's not FDIC insured, but for
mm,
those that aren't familiar, they announced their institutional product that guarantees a 4% APR, not an APY, on
mm,
stablecoins. So to me, it makes sense that as money piles in, those yields compress, which is natural and that should happen. And we're seeing Aave's building an institutional product and releasing it soon. So
mm,
I think as all of that, all of that liquidity comes into DeFi and we get like a full efficient system, the rates
mm,
that we see on DeFi should match what we see around the world, which is nearing 0%. It doesn't make sense that you'd have divergent prices for yields. I think the term in economics is the law of one price. It might not be
mm,
that might be more about products, but it's similar here. Like if you can get 4% in coin and compound, and you can get less than 1% or 0% in your bank, everyone
mm.
moves to this, compressing the yield. And the
Yeah.
yield has to come from somewhere. And right now in DeFi, what's happening now is not sustainable. And I think it's natural that it will compress in the future, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, arbitrage in general is still quite a big thing in crypto. Yield arbitrage, the price arbitrage between different cryptos on different exchanges is still a big thing. As we mentioned in earlier in the call, it's not an efficient market yet. And as
Yeah.
institutions and more liquidity gets provided to different networks and protocols, surely the yield will go down, for example, in stable coins, as you mentioned, because if there's an easy bridge between your bank account, normal fiat account, to a stablecoin account, and you can get, in the extreme case, negative yield in your bank account and plus 20% in a stablecoin account, of course, there would be a flood over there. But then there are risks, as you say, smart contract risk, maybe some custodial risk. There's a big discussion about Tether and now also Circle with USDC. So there are obviously these risks looming that we haven't really seen in full display yet, because the market is so nascent still, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I completely agree. It's very new. There's a ton of risk. If I'm an institution, I'm probably not taking that risk now, but in 5 years, maybe there's a way for me to do it that's safe and I'm comfortable with and my clients want. And so I think that should bring the yields down, which is exciting for everyone right now because if you're watching this, you're probably like an early adopter of DeFi, and there's probably a ton of great opportunity for you, as long as you're not chasing the highest yield, of course.
Yeah, and I think it's an uplifting story that you can present yourself. I mean, 1.5 year, you were, being in crypto for 1.5 years. I mean, people who are joining now, they are still early. I mean, there's what 95% of the world population is still not into crypto. So if you join today, you are still early.
Yeah. I
So
did see some stats that I don't know what it was, but it was like a shocking. I don't know if you saw this, but in the US, I think it was like a shockingly high percentage of millennials that received a stimulus check put it into crypto. I think it might have been as crazy as like 40%, which
wow.
is very fascinating. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. But it was some very high number like that. I'd love to look that up at some point.
I saw
Um,
I saw a report from the BIS, basically the bank of the organization that organizes the central banks. So the central bank of central banks, if you will. And they put out a paper or study about crypto and how much is adopted. And they quote a survey, I think it was back in 2020. So obviously there's a difference between now and then, but they quoted there that there's less than 1% of the world's population, or in the US or something, is exposed to crypto. But then you look at the number of wallets, and as you mentioned, stimulus checks and all this. People, there was a counter study to the BIS report saying that 40 million Americans are exposed to crypto, into crypto. Maybe they don't have assets, but they have a wallet. So
mm,
that's obviously the counter argument. So yeah, the numbers are obviously different and difficult to measure, I think. But I think one thing is for sure: if you join crypto still, it's quite early compared to, the mass adoption that we hopefully will see within the next few years.
yeah. Well, certainly with DeFi. I mean, it's tough to, who knows with Bitcoin because it's kind of like a steady use case. It requires more um, adoption as like a means of payment and a value
Mm,
store. Whereas I hope DeFi is early. Of course, it could all turn out to be nothing. You never know. I mean, I think regulation could halt it or slow down the process pretty drastically. But I hope we're still early in DeFi. It's my hope that in 5 or 10 years, the projects we're talking about now are just in a totally different place and much more developed and advanced. So
for sure. And with that, I want to thank you, Justin, for coming on today. The last question I always ask is, where can people find you if they want to find more information about you, your content, etc.?
yeah, sure. Thank you. Again, thank you so much for having me. If you want to learn more about me or any of the content I produce, you can just search Justin Bram on YouTube. That should pop up right away. And then if you search my name, Justin Bram, on Twitter, you should find me there. If you want to be a part of the conversation, I'd recommend if you go to my YouTube channel, there's links in, I think, all of my videos to our Discord community, which has about 2,500 or so people in there. And we have an
Yes.
incredible admin team that like everyone there is just excited about helping people out and answering questions and like contributing to this space. People are posting so many great resources there, so it's free to join. There's no obligation. You can just lurk around, you can contribute, you can ask questions, but that is linked in all of my YouTube videos if you're interested in chatting there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Justin. Take care wherever you are in the world right now. Maybe financial freedom is coming to you faster than you know.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. It was great to meet you and great to chat.